Hey everyone, this is the SIG-Auth meeting for January 17th, 2024. I think we got a pretty full agenda. So let's get started. So last meeting, y'all didn't go over the needs kept stuff at all, right? It was like right at the end, and I think it didn't fit.
Yeah, Jordan just pinged about it, and then people came and updated it after the meeting.
Okay. So I guess so we go through the list. I don't see James on the call. I need to ping him, make sure he's gonna keep working on this one, but I think nothing is preventing this from continuing. Though I don't remember what the beta criteria for this one were. Uh, Structured auth then and auth Z are in flight. All the code is mostly there, I think, for both of them. Uh, to hear what's the plan for the cluster trust bundle stuff?
Um, I actually Jordan filled that out. He wants to promote it to beta, so I guess the plan is to promote it to beta. I'm not aware of any changes that are needed to it.
So this would promote the REST API and the volume mounting
I
again.
I guess, yeah.
Okay. I think if I remember correctly, the biggest remaining items were like E2E test, right? More E2E test that.
We have the E2E test landed. I'll need to double check and see what's remaining on the beta criteria.
Well, there was just one, right? I mean, like there was
Oh
like
yeah.
that's what I mean. There were more permutations to make sure that we covered. Um, okay. So that is there. Um, I admit I don't keep up with this kept because Jordan does a good job and I don't have to worry about it. Anybody know anything about this one?
If memory serves, the last time we went at it, we decided to add a marker for did someone use it in a particular way? And that is time is running out. So if it's not already done, it'll be coming up this release or next, I think. But there wasn't any big change.
Okay, so parts of it are already GA and then other parts, yeah. So this one is going GA this, at least according to the cap, it's going GA this release.
Yeah.
Um, Good. That seems fine. Uh, let's see, Rob, you on the
Yeah,
call?
I'm here.
So
Uh,
told you
yeah,
I would read all the stuff that you wrote, and then I didn't, so I'm sorry.
it's all right. This can probably move into well, I don't know how this is categorized, but there is an existing cap that we're repurposed. There's a reference grant cap that got merged provisionally with some objections. There's a PR that's open now, has been open for a bit now that resolves those and adjusts it to make use of our updated and kind of more broad approach for, I think we've called it referential authorization instead of just reference grant, but same rough idea. So yeah, this does have a cap, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it definitely needs review. I added it later in the agenda anyway, so.
Yeah, so the top bucket is things that we consider implementable in the sense
Okay.
kept in this cycle will at least get merged into the implementable state. Um, and if it's, already in that state, then ideally it would keep progressing and you'd have code and stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, it sounds right to move it to the upper bucket is from what I see. Um,
Cool.
so I'll do that. I'll fight with this doc afterwards. I don't want to try to
Yeah,
drag
sure.
him in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Thanks.
to hear, I know you have a cap open for this. I haven't read it. I'm sorry again. Um, uh, what is your plans for this in the 130 timeframe?
I mean, ideally, the cap would get reviewed, we'd merge it, and I've already got an implementation like rolling, so it's feasible to get it done like merged to alpha in 130. Don't know if that'll happen. I think there's still some open questions around how exactly we would want the client Go integration to work if we choose to address that in alpha.
Okay. I remember I had asked for details around like a Hang Baby design on how this would be in the future extended to support like HFMs. Is that added at some point?
I
or-
have not added that yet, but I am planning to take another round. I think we have got a few open feedback items around like stuff that should be in the cup. So I'm going to try to do that in the next week or so. When is the freeze coming up? I know it's very close. The enhancements freeze.
Uh, February 6th, I believe, is the freeze.
Okay.
Instead of just guessing, I'll just check. Um, uh, feature that's code freeze. Enhancements freeze is February 8th. Sorry, not February 6th. But yeah, not nominally in the next 2-3 weeks, basically.
Okay.
So yeah. And then the workload identity for image pull stuffs. Anish, I know you and I are working on the doc for this. So the gist of this one is, so like, we briefly spoke last year in a SIG-Auth meeting and a SIG-Node meeting about this, and folks were interested in having this capability, which is basically injecting a projected service account token into the kubelets call of the credential provider, so that if the credential provider wanted to do like an STS, it could, or maybe you could directly use um, the service account token to talk with the registry. Either way, I think for this one, I'm personally only aiming to just try to get a KEP merged in, not necessarily planning on code, because like the structured auth stuff needs a decent chunk of code. Same with like auth and I suspect like all the other things will take up time.
You can add me as an interested reviewer.
Sure. Do that. Anybody else? Maybe I'm looking at maybe Mike. Maybe you're interested, since that was a space.
Sure, I bet Mike Toffin is as well.
There's two mics. So, oops, wrong window. So Mike Neeson. I might spell his last name wrong, but I will correct it.
Perfect.
All right, so cool. But yeah, that's good. This is funny. The list of reviewers are all from Google, so I guess Google cares.
We have like a trickle of like every 6 months a customer says it would be really cool if this worked, and we're like, yeah, it would be really cool, but it never
Yeah,
never gets to the top of the priority list.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so that's good. I believe we discussed all of the remaining items in the last like triage meeting and said that we were not going to pursue them. So like I spoke with Standa and he said he did not have resources right now to work on this. I don't know if anyone from Amazon is on the call, but last time I spoke with Micah, they did not have cycles to work on this. Jordan was not interested in pushing this forward right now, so unless somebody else wants to take that. Wait, sorry. Yeah, this is the node authorizer one. Yep. Again, I don't think anyone's pushing this one forward right now. And I think the rest of them I think they need a lot more evidence before we start like trying to pursue them. So I guess with that in mind, does anyone else have any specific topic related to this doc, or like basically KEPs or other larger features or designs that we should be pursuing as a SIG this release?
Hi, my name's Kevin. I have an item on the agenda that's kind of related to this. I'm at the bottom of the agenda. There was, so as part of SIG-Node, there was this rotate kubelet server certificate to GA. I think this is kind of predates a lot of the KEP work. And there was an ask to try and promote this one to GA from SIG-Node side, or from, I guess it's led by SIG-Auth. I'm hoping to kind of take over at least drafting it's kind of a weird state because it's already beta and I believe it's heavily used.
Yeah.
But I was told that there is a lot of work needed in this retrospective KEP to even get that approved. And I am, to be honest, I don't know much about retrospective KEPs and like what is really necessary for this one. So ideally, I'd like to get some reviewers from SIG-Auth. I don't think it has to be in the 1.30 timeframe if everyone's swamped with releases, but it'd be nice to get this KEP, get the retrospective KEP at least merged so we can promote this to GA eventually.
So I'll be honest, I'm pretty sure this KEP predates my significant involvement in SIG-Auth, like in the sense of this feature predates that, which tells you it's very old. David, do you remember the specific of how this was designed, initially implemented? Because I mean, I kind of know what it does today in the sense that I haven't looked at it in a while, but
So there are some important details to note around the auto approve versus not auto approve. I don't recall anything we thought was missing from beta for accepting it to GA, and I think that's probably the most critical aspect of it. But
I
definitely the
think
KEP needs to indicate, as I recall, the auto approve will automatically approve for a node IP. I think it's for a node IP. When the kubelet client for that node was used.
that's for a node. Is that for a node serving cert or a node client?
Well, this was kept for the serving cert part,
All
right?
right.
Of the client. So yeah, but just it's important to list out those details in the KEP, and I can't think of GA criteria that would be different from what we have today. That would probably be the most important thing to solicit.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think what Sergey identified is there was not really any end-to-end tests around this feature, and the metrics for this feature are still in alpha. So I think maybe part of it, I guess there are beta metrics. So I don't know if the metrics have to be promoted to GA with the feature being promoted to GA. But currently the metrics are in alpha, and I don't think there are any end-to-end tests for this feature.
Okay, both of those are worth noting. It might have to be an integration test just based on what it's wired up to.
Okay, so, all right. I guess what I'll do is I'll take this over from Sergey, and then I guess, open it up under my name so I can address some of this stuff. And then we'll go from there. But yeah, if I can get anyone to help with reviews from the SIG-Auth side, that'd be helpful. I think it can be out of band of the release, most likely, because I don't think I'm going to have time to get this 1.30, to be honest.
I guess I would ask, as part of the KEP process, like as part of writing the retrospective KEP, you might want to review the code, not necessarily in the sense of what it does, but more for who did it and when. And maybe you just sort of reach out to those folks and make sure that whatever they remember that's important is sort of written down. I think that's like the missing piece for me is I just don't have the history on how this exactly came to be because it's old enough that I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, I don't either. I was voluntold. So I'll try and figure out what options are for this.
In terms of volunteering, I do not think I have cycled at 130. I don't know if anybody else does.
I won't in 130. I know I am listed on the reference grant. I did look at your doc before when it was a Google Doc and left some comments on there, Rob.
Yeah, sorry, I'll get back to those as well. I know one of them, I'm just seeing that your comment in chat too, is that the doc had gotten out of out of date with the POC. The KEP and POC do match. Should be verbatim. I'll try to get back to the doc so it's also in sync. But yeah, trying to move forward as much as possible with the KEP, and I'll at least make sure I respond to your comments there.
Appreciate it. Just a link to where they are in the KEP would even be perfect, rather than repeating yourself. Yeah,
sounds good.
Okay, cool. Anything else related to 130 plans before we keep going? Okay. So the next item, Rita had added to the agenda. So the conversation I wanted to have with folks on this call was basically, so Jordan is proposing that we move both structured auth-in and auth-z to beta in 130. And I have no doubt that we can get the code and tests up to snuff for what we would consider beta level quality. Mostly because we're not really adding that much new code. We're just rewiring existing code in more clever ways. The concern I had around alpha to beta transition here is I don't think anybody's actually tried to use the new stuff. The rationale that I got from the comment that Rita had made was basically that these aren't REST APIs and they're primarily admin facing, so we have a little bit more flexibility. I don't know, maybe like at least for like structured auth-in, like it is an API sort of built to be at least partially exposed to end users if you desire to do that. So I have some hesitancy there about graduating these, but I wanted to ask other folks for their opinion. And also I need to put the select right in here.
I know we haven't gotten to the point of wiring these up and using them yet.
Yeah, I mean, they're very new, so I wouldn't really expect it yet.
Yeah. It
Like
is
what?
technically possible to change it if we decide we made a mistake. It's not significantly easier than actually changing a REST API, though.
Yeah, I think the only difference is it's not persisted. And then the secondary difference is this is not like developer facing, it's admin facing.
Yeah, the issue is you end up having to honor the old so that people are able to upgrade. So you can make a change, but they still have to be convertible and work. It's worth thinking of offline on that. I would probably be okay with going to beta.
Okay, so SIG and easier.
Yeah, it's because you still have to be able to convert to whatever it is, whatever information you actually end up needing, right? So the round tripping rules are essentially the same. You still have to honor old and new at the same time so people have an upgrade path.
Yeah.
It's similar.
Okay. Anybody else on the call have any feedback? Anybody else on the call has tried the new stuff? See if it does what you wanted to do. If not, I guess we can keep going. So I had added this to the agenda like a long time back and then came back to it. So I think the high level question I have is, should authentication be able to return warnings to the user? In particular, like if you look at the new structured auth stuff, there's many reasons authentication can fail. For example, like cell policy that prevents it from succeeding, even though the token is otherwise valid. that will result in a log statement in the API server log, assuming it returns an error, but for the user, it's just a 401. Is that okay? Or should there be some higher fidelity capability of like, maybe you can tell the user something that they need to do?
So my memory of the sorts of failures you can have with a new authentication configuration is that those changes would still have to be made by a cluster admin, not by the user actually authenticating, right?
Right. So like one example use case is like say your IDP encodes the IP that you originated from, or like the VLAN or whatever that you originated from into your token. So a potential use case could be the authentication stack would say, okay, I see that you are authenticated, but you authenticated from like the wrong network. So you need to basically get a different token. Like you're valid, but just not valid enough. Um, so like, yes, it is true that the admin said that's the rule, but the end user just gets a 401 and they don't necessarily understand why.
I
And
see.
maybe
So you would have this be a field in the configuration where a cluster admin gets to say like something similar like to validating admission policy. If it fails for this cell expression, give this error.
basically,
Okay.
but today, whatever error you get is just a log statement in the API server logs, which is fine for the admin to figure out what's wrong, but the user might have absolutely no idea what's wrong. They might not even realize that their credential that's messed up versus like just a plain old like they did something wrong. To hear.
It'd be maybe useful to have a sort of capability like this for webhook token authentication.
Right. So I think it also opens up the fact that like if we did it for OIDC, we probably should just do it for Authn as a whole. And so we have to somehow represent that. Maybe it's okay to only do it for OIDC and token review, because token review is the authentication extension mechanism we have. Like we don't have like cert review or something like that. Um, I guess you would probably also need it for request header, so that a front proxy could still do the same thing. Any thoughts, David? I see you're off.
Yeah. I'm now considering like, so okay, let's say it does get added to a token review, and would warnings from the token review, like the delegated webhook, automatically be made into warnings that get returned from the QPI server? Or would the cluster admin have to explicitly opt into those too? And if so, how would they opt in?
I guess I would ask for token review. I guess there's two places that can happen that come to mind. One is like API server has an authentication webhook configured.
Yep, that's the one I'm thinking of.
I mean, but the admin configured that one, presumably to a webhook they really, really trust. Hey, do you not trust the webhook?
I don't know whether trusting the webhook is the same as thinking all the warnings from that webhook should get returned to the user.
Okay, yeah, I can buy that if you want some, yeah, like if you feel like you might have some context that maybe the webhook doesn't.
Or if you don't trust your users, I trust my webhook, but not my users.
Do you have an example? I'm trying to think of what you mean.
Maybe the warning says that the Cube API server didn't pay their bill last month. And so you laugh, but like that happens when you hit some REST APIs, right? Like what was the TV guide one? Anyway, like it happens. I see no reason why a cluster admin would want his users to know he failed to pay the bill.
Okay, yeah, I can see that if you have some external system that might not necessarily be fully under your control, but you have some kind of billing relationship with it or otherwise. Um, and but previously there was no mechanism for that system to communicate to your end users, and now there is.
Exactly, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like when we add it, whatever we create needs to be able to handle a case like that. Putting the control, I think, with the cluster admin
Okay.
could solve that.
So would the rationale be that you would need specific control for like token review, but for like the OIDC stuff, the control is like in the config itself, so it's kind of fine. Like obviously if you don't put a warning in there, there will be no warning.
Yes, I agree that that is clear, that the control that is needed would be there with a structure configuration that said this is the warning I want to give.
Okay. Would this apply to request header? Like would there be headers that a
That one I'm a little maybe confused over. Doesn't the front proxy already have the power to return whatever it wants? Like if you wanted it as a header.
Yeah, so I guess a front proxy between the client and Cube API server could already return warnings that like client Go would interpret as, because it's just following the RFC around warnings. Would
Can
an API server be
How are
able
warnings communicated? Like, what's the actual mechanism?
it's some header.
Okay.
I forget, but yeah, it's a RFC around. It's one of the old RFCs that we decided to implement basically. But at the end of the day, it's just a string. There's no schema or anything, and we try to keep them shortish.
Yeah, but I mean, if it fails, the QAPI server never even gets to see the request, right? So I don't understand what configuration we could even have.
Right. I think so. Is that still true for when Cube API server is proxying to like aggregated API server?
That response gets returned faithfully. So if the aggregated API server sets a header, it gets returned back.
I guess in that case, if you get that far, you're already authenticated. So I guess stepping back for a second, would such warnings be allowed to be returned when authentication was successful?
Don't know how, well, I guess you didn't indicate that you wanted a different than normal warning.
Say that one more time.
Well, warnings can come back on any response, authenticated or not. Were you thinking of a different, not a general cube warning, but a like specific different header for your warning?
No. So what I was more asking is, so let's take the example of token review. If token review returns a warning, and let's say the admin has opted into those warnings, if the token review passes and the client is authenticated, do you still want to show them the warning?
Every other warning that is set comes through regardless of whether the request was successful. And so, for instance, you might get a warning that you need to pay your bill before tomorrow or you will be cut off. And so you would expect a success and that warning, right? Which you will ignore until your request fails because you paid.
I feel like there's some history there, David.
Nothing I'm going to share on this call.
Yeah. I'll ask you in an unrecorded medium at some point. Okay. Okay, so thanks for talking through me that. I think the feeling I kind of get from this is probably because we're talking about changing the JWT authentication API in some way, but also changing token review in some way, and like probably API server flags. That to me sounds like at least a small cap, not necessarily like just a thing that you do. Does that seem fair?
Maybe just an update on the existing structure configuration? Or would you want to pursue it separately?
I mean, we could do it as an update. The current structured auth then doesn't touch token review in any way. It doesn't touch the.
Right. Okay. Then yeah, sure. Probably an add-on.
Okay. So I'll move this into needs cap, and then I will summarize our discussion in here after the call. Okay, that sounds good. Anything else? Sorry.
Can I have a very quick comment here?
Oh yeah, of course, go for it.
So if you expose a warning, so by the way, this is Tim from Uber. So if you give, like, I think the network is not a very good example here. So if you give a warning to say the network is not come from like a data center or something, at Uber, typically, like, we have a red team internally, we will scan and ask you don't expose that information. So normally, typically what we do is you get a warning, but it's pretty generic messages to say, hey, you get a warning, and then through you a FAQ page. And it's user responsibility to go through the FAQ page and verify one by one. But you just don't want to expose all the details of the warning.
Okay. I guess so, like with the OIDC stuff, you could, because the warnings would be, I guess, reactionary directly in the config. I guess you would specifically, your warning would always be go to this link and figure out why something failed.
But especially for the token one, especially the network one, there personally I have a lot of concerns. Say, you expose, say, oh, your network is not configured right, and because we have a lot, like if it is public endpoint, there are a lot of scanners, right? There's scan and get failure and retry again. You definitely don't want to expose, especially for token, like token case. If the token failed to log in, you just throw out a warning, but don't want to expose a lot of information. But for OIDC one, I totally agree with you, because the most cases they're like trusted partners, right?
Okay. I guess in your case, would it be sufficient if the token review stuff was, opt-in, right? So like the warnings wouldn't be omitted at all. And so perhaps instead of just being a simple opt-in, opt-out, there would be some mechanism for redacting. I had to think on that. But no, I see the point you're making, that the warnings that are useful for a trusted user to figure out what's wrong are also useful for an attacker to figure out how to get better leverage in your environment.
Exactly.
So yeah, that is a good point.
Hence leaving it up to cluster admin control.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. All right, I will put all that stuff in and then see. I guess maybe for 131, I can try to poke around and see if we can have a cap. Let's see. I see, Mike, you are on the call. So I think I had this question for you and maybe David.
Yeah. I remember that I think we wanted this is the audiences one.
Yeah, so the REST API has slice of string for what you can
right,
request, but then the volume has string.
So JOT spec says multiple audiences are allowed. I think we didn't like multiple audiences generally as a pattern and didn't see many cases where it was necessary in steady state. There was one case where you are migrating from one audience to another audience, where it seems reasonable for there to be multiple audiences at play. You could implement that with 2 audiences in the token, or you could implement that with 2 accepted audiences in the server. We chose to implement that with 2 accepted audiences in the server, which is why token review supports multiple audiences. And the projected volume does not support multiple audiences. Token request does support multiple audiences. Yeah, I think like I don't know if we should support it because it's there and possible here, like in the projected volume API. I think we should, it would be great to have a concrete, Vault needs this for some reason or something. The situation here doesn't seem like a justifiable reason to add this support.
But if I understood correctly, they want to pass a single token to Vault, which Vault can then both use to validate that the token is meant for it, for that, and then they want Vault to be able to turn around and impersonate you to the Cube API to make calls as the service account token, which to me sounds exactly the wrong way of using multiple audiences, because those, like, one is for the service and one is for the API server, and you're just pretending they're the same, so that way you can do 2 distinct operations with it.
Yeah. What Vault feature does that?
I think what they're trying to do is normally I think Vault runs on the cluster, and I think this is less of a problem then because I think Vault can use its own credentials, and I think they're trying to do something where Vault is not running on the cluster and they want to do the secretless authentication with the service account flow.
Um 6150. How did you find that issue? 615.
It's just linked in the middle of the other one, because the person who opened it commented on the other one. I can also just put it in chat for anyone else who wants to just be able to click on it. Chat. So this is where they're like, why can't you do this? Which I'm not exactly sure what it points to.
Yeah, this is a long issue.
Yeah, so basically when they're saying that, like, when you're running in the cluster, you can just use the pod's local service account token to authenticate to the Cube API. And now I guess they're trying to use the incoming token to do both, like, double duty, because they're not on the cluster.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, they should probably just use the API server's audience if they really want to do this, which I don't know if is advisable. I don't see. I don't know.
Out of cluster vault with no token review or jot, secretless. That's the fate. I guess this is what they're trying to make work. So if you're in cluster, you're fine because you just get the credential mounted in. And if you're out of cluster, but you have a credential, you're also fine. It's just when you're out of cluster and you don't have a credential. Yeah. I don't know. I think you're kind of stuck, right? If you're saying you're not going to run on the cluster, you're going to have some way to authenticate to the cluster, but saying that incoming credentials from workloads, how you're going to get credentials to do things against the Cube API seems wrong. Never mind that I'm not 100% sure. Like, it says token reviewer job. Can't most actors on the system can't perform token reviews. I don't know if they're like calling the David, what do we call the Who Am I API? Self subject review? No.
The yeah, I think it might have been self-subject review.
Okay.
I would also be surprised by a flow that says send your token that is valid for service X to me, which is a different service, so that I can use it to replay you.
Mm-hmm.
That would defy my expectation.
Yeah. And then we have folks here that are like, just add the Vault issuer to your API server issuer config, so it also accepts that as a valid. Like, I don't, at that point, just use this for everything because you don't care about the separation between these two anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think this comes down to it is probably hard for this person to provision a credential for this out of cluster vault. Otherwise, they would just do that and be in the 2 bucket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, especially if you have a cloud provider where you have to figure out how to get a credential from their specific IDP thing and keep it rotated and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, cloud provider dependent.
Mike, would you mind like commenting on this? I suspect though, I think what we're coming down to is I don't think we can do anything here, so we shouldn't just leave the issue open saying or not saying anything.
Yeah.
So if you want to summarize some thoughts and just close it out, I think that's fine. But I don't think we would encourage the use of distinctly different audiences that don't mean the same thing as a weird workaround to the vault issue.
Sure.
Keep clicking this thing. So that's it. We still got time. I guess let's keep going. I believe this is somebody from Google. No, maybe. Oh no, they are at Google. They just used to be at Pivotal or some other place. So this was opened up, I guess a whole year ago now. The gist of what I remember is they have a namespace and then they have a service running in the namespace that sets finalizers. And when the namespace gets deleted, the the pods get deleted before, or sorry, the RBAC for the pods gets deleted before the pods, so the pods can't clean up the finalizer, and then so the namespace gets stuck. And I think their request was make RBAC special so it gets deleted last, and that didn't seem right to me.
More generic than pod, this would, if you had a controller running in a different namespace, and then a user granted you your controller or your external user rights to manage thing in their namespace, and then you used those rights to add a finalizer and then provision something out of tree, out of cube somewhere. And then that user removed your role binding, you'd be left in exactly the same spot, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
yeah, this seems like a good application potentially for something like a lien, where you would actually be able to say, don't delete this role binding until this other thing I have a finalizer on is gone.
Did that ever happen, David? Did we
It
ever
did
do
not ever happen.
that?
But I think that's a lot more reasonable than trying to order deletion on a namespace.
Okay. I guess before going on, does anybody else have thoughts on this one? Okay. If not, David, would you mind maybe summarizing your thoughts around like liens and stuff on this? And I don't know, do we close this? Do we keep it open?
Unless someone wants to speak up and say, here's how we would decide on order of cleanup inside of a namespace, knowing that we can have any number of dependencies or CRDs. Assuming there's nobody who wants to do that, yes, I can. Otherwise, I'd like to listen to them first.
Okay, before we move to the next topic, I just see that Jordan responded in the Slack thread about this one, and I wanted to go back to it real quick. So Jordan is saying, because it's opt-in, no behavior change by default, it's admin facing only, no end user visible changes, and it's not a REST API, config API only, no round trip requirements.
At a practical level, I don't see how that would work when the consuming code needs the information either way.
Say that one more time. What do you mean?
So if you have consuming code that needs values X, Y, and Z, it still needs values X, Y, and Z, no matter what serialization format you have coming in.
Do we require on an upgrade that, at least for beta things, if you had a beta config as a file on disk, do we require that on that upgrade you need not make any change to that file for it to still work?
We try very, very, very hard to do that, because you have to make a change to the file. It's another thing that you have to do and coordinate on your update.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I would agree with that. I would go as far as to say we should probably avoid such things outside of catastrophic CVEs or something.
You should go talk to Pastmo, who wanted to remove the ability to write KMS v1. Came up last meeting where Jordan
Yeah,
wanted to keep it
that's
forever.
still current mode. I still want to remove that, but
Well, so it's the same concept, right? So if you require change,
I guess I'm okay if you give people like a 2-year warning. So
yeah. At any rate, however he got himself there, that's fine. I'm still in favor of exposing it just like before, but don't break me on upgrade. Well, I'm not me because I'm not using it, but don't break people who are using it on upgrade.
fair. All right, continuing on the thread. We still got 7 minutes, so we might be able to cover the next one. So Anish, you added this one. Want to talk about it?
So this was from the SIG-Auth triage meeting that we had. It's basically the user has large number of role bindings, and when the API server restarts, they're getting a 403 forbidden. So I think we talked about it a little bit, but we also wanted to get the thoughts from folks here in the meeting. And I think there were 2 questions, so I added those questions in the agenda, basically.
Should the default behavior of informers at startup be changed, and should we improve performance of the RBAC? Okay. Where did they go?
And I think Mo, you also started a thread on Slack, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think I had asked about this with Jordan. I think Jordan's feeling was that we should not wait for informers before we serve endpoints, and instead rely on a load balancer to decide when to route traffic. But the server itself should be able to do whatever. I think I generally agree with that. I don't know where I land on the if I make 50,000 row bindings, the RBAC authorizer stops working, because I kind of feel like you just shouldn't do that. I don't know. David, you wrote it, I think. So what do you feel about it?
I would actually expect it to work. It would just take a while to load. Does it actually not work, or does it just take a while?
I think your request times out before it can figure out, like, if you have enough.
I'm surprised because I thought it was more efficient at decimating than that, but I don't find myself stressed out by it. And I'm also okay with the server is ready equals false until RBAC has been loaded, and then it is ready equals true. I remember when we were adding the have informer start a check, there was one attempt to try to put it on health Z, and that didn't go well because it caused a death spiral. And so adding it to ready Z kept the pod from being killed, or kept the process from being killed for health Z equals false. But kept it from being generally accessible until it was ready.
Makes sense. Do you agree with Jordan on we should just leave the behavior as is for informers?
I think I would.
Okay. So with that one in agreement, unless someone else has any thoughts, and my leaning was like, I mean, sure, if we wanted to approve the RBAC authorizer, maybe we can, but I don't know if that's like something to be too worried about, and among all the other things we should be doing. So I would be fine just trying to summarize that and just close this one.
Okay, I can summarize it.
Okay. Thank you, Nish. So so let's see, Kevin, we already spoke about this one, so that's good. Rob, I don't think we can talk about referential authorization in 2 minutes. What do you think?
Oh, you don't think it's that easy? I mean, I'd accept just a blanket approval. But no, I understand. I will try and follow up with people offline. I've responded to a lot of the feedback on there, but there's still a couple things for me to get to. But I could definitely use some reviews from SIG-Auth. So far, it's mostly been Tim, which is really good feedback, but additional feedback would be great.
Okay. Is there any high level specific, like, I guess in the brief time we have, what's the biggest difference between the reference grant stuff that was proposed before versus now?
It's basically following conversations we've had at previous KubeCons of this needs to also be an authorizer of some sort, right? So there's some kind of programmatic understanding of, hey, here's a path, starting with JSON path of where you can find a reference. And then when you see a reference at that path, you can grant access as long as it matches the group and resource that we're expecting it to. You can grant access to that thing. And then there's this thing that connects it as a consumer, connects, so it says, hey, I, as a controller of Foo, use this service account and implement this pattern. So yeah, it's actually a fair amount different than the original KEP, but the concept of reference grant remains. It just adds additional concepts on top, so we can do the kind of programmatic authorization, automatic authorization, instead of relying on controllers to do it all on their own. That's all.
David, by any chance, are you going to look at this release? I know
Yes, I
Jordan.
will. I had comments on the Google Doc that was the precursor to this, and I will come back in and look at this one as well. I do still have the question about intent, Rob. Like, is the intent to create a new authorizer, or is the intent to be bound to RBAC? And I think settling that early is important, because otherwise, like, every observable thing becomes the API. And it becomes very important for choices like, how do we get to turn this on? If it's a new authorizer, well, someone would have to choose to turn it on. If it reuses RBAC, they don't. There's advantages to having a separate authorizer for it.
Yeah, I think the RBAC here becomes a scalability issue, so I tend to believe that a separate authorizer is probably better here, despite that not being how the POC is structured. I think that can just be an implementation detail of the POC, but definitely something that needs to be resolved before we get to something like entry.
Okay, then I will have a look, and I'll have an eye for looking for that as well.
Cool, thanks.
Cool. All right. We're just out of time, so I guess we'll see everybody in 2 weeks. Thanks all. Bye. Take care.